Let's start our football segment with a bit of Marko Stamenic, the All Whites, well, one of the All Whites Usos currently in the Flying Kiwis realms. Marko Stamenic played Champions League football against Manchester United, which
Close.
actually
Against Manchester
Manchester.
City.
I said
The better one.
Manchester United, and while I was saying it, I was thinking about Rodri, who obviously plays for Man City. So I was a step ahead, but no disrespect to any Manchester folk or folk like yourself who support Manchester United. But the
Yeah.
I am curious, and I would like you to just drop a little Stamenic versus Rodri comparison from that game, if you don't mind. But I will share your tweet, which had a nugget about Marko Stamenic information. Marko Stamenic is the first New Zealand male to play Champions League for two different clubs. Ali Riley is the only woman, 3 clubs. Weirdly, 3 out of his 4 Champions League appearances have been against Manchester City. He's also been booked in all of them, with 3 out of 4 yellows coming in exactly the 82nd minute. That is very strange alignment there, but a serendipity with how Marko Stamenic controls the midfield, shall we say. First question. Did he have a direct matchup with Rodri?
uh yes and no. Like he did in that they played the same position, but it was defensive midfield, so they didn't he wasn't marking Rodri or anything because Rodri was
Yeah.
further back pulling strings while Stamenic was hanging just in front of his defensive line because his team were on defending duties
Whoa, 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 whoa,
basically
whoa,
the
whoa,
whole
whoa,
game,
whoa, whoa. You said Rodri was hanging back, pulling strings, but you
except
didn't
when
say
he goes sit up and
Stamenic
score the
was
goal. So
Stamenic was hanging back and pulling strings as well. Like, let's continue the Rodri comparison here. Like, be fair to Stamenic. He's playing the same role as Rodri for his team.
yeah, same role for his team, different scenarios of what that role required because of how Man City dominated with about like 79% possession or something, which is actually, like, to be fair, when Red Star Belgrade, aka Crvena Zvezda, are playing in their home league, back in the Serbian league against Serbian clubs, they're usually the team in that position doing the Man City thing. So when he's playing in the Serbian Superliga, the Rodri thing of what Rodri did to him is kind of even more of a focus. Although haven't seen, started to see Rodri pop up with goals. He scored in the Champions League final last year. He scored some crucial goals recently for them. Scored in this game, lovely little finish, kind of thing that I can see the potential for Stamenic to do that for Red Star. Hasn't quite got there yet. Like he has got 1 assist for them this season. He hasn't got any goals yet, but he's getting in positions where it's like I can see that becoming a factor in his game down the line, as it has for Rodri, because that wasn't the case for him when he first played for City either. So there's a development there to follow if he wants to continue on this pathway. But I mean, even in the game where they had 21% or it might have been 29% by the end of the game, I think it was 21% in the first half and 29% overall, but like less than 30% of possession. He completed, I think it was 21 out of 23 passes, Stamenic did, and they weren't all just short passes. Like there was one gorgeous little flick around the corner where he was like facing his own goal, gets a ball under pressure, and he just sort of side foot diverts it towards a midfielder who was dropping in front of him. Like clever stuff like that. He switched the play a couple times nicely. Like it wasn't all just collect the ball from a centre back, pass it back to the other centre back. It wasn't just that stuff. Um, so he wasn't giving the ball away. He did give away a few fouls in the second half. And that's probably, if I had to pinpoint a reason why I think that 82nd minute thing seems to catch up with them, is I would suspect that those yellow cards were all accumulation based fouls. Like not bad fouls, but just like, come on, mate, that's your third or fourth foul today. I'm going to have to book you at some point. So here we go. And the 82nd minute is about when ref's patience runs out with that kind of stuff. Maybe that would be my theory. He did give away a foul where he gave away the foul where City scored their second goal. It was a free kick from Julian Alvarez, which curled in and went inside far post. But that was a goalkeeping mistake. The keeper came out to punch it and he missed it and just kind of knuckleballed it off he didn't fully miss it. He skimmed it off his knuckles and it went into his own net. So I thought that probably should have been an own goal. I'm not sure if that's been redistributed yet, but That was Stamenic who gave away that foul, although it probably wasn't a foul they should have conceded from. It was a keeper mistake rather than anything. So um, that is the aspect though, where it's like maybe that when he plays at this higher level, he has conceded fouls consistently. He's been booked in all four of these games. I also thought though the positional stuff I mentioned, the passing, the way he sort of held his spot in defense, the way he linked with his other midfielder, the way he dropped into the back line when it looked like a cross was coming in order to bolster those stocks, like some of the coverage that he got. I looked at his heat map on one of the websites, and it was real deep. Like it's all stuff deeper than the sort of halfway circle thing in his own half. So it was a lot of like stuck in his own half there, but he was covering a lot of ground side to side in that. Um, I thought he looked super composed in this game against the European champions. Oh, you're really impressive for like in consideration of what his team was up to and what kind of task he was up against. I mean, this dude is so good. And we've said it a couple times now. I don't think people quite realize in general how good he is because he's playing in Serbia and was playing in Denmark. It's not the English Premier League, and he hasn't had as many chances to show it for the All Whites. And when he did, scored a beautiful goal against Qatar. They didn't even get to finish that game. So I don't even think that goal gets to count for him, but it was a beautiful hit. And that's the kind of thing I think we can start seeing more often from Stamenic. We'll get to do a little bit more, we'll get to push forward a little bit more in those all whites games the way he does in domestic games as well. So particularly when he's also going to have Joe Bell to help him do the defensive stuff, that double pivot. Like in football, if you can control the midfield, you can control the game to some extent. That doesn't mean you can win the game because you got to be able to create chances. You got to be able to put those chances away. You got to be able to not concede goals when other teams lump the ball over your midfield. Like there's ways around that. But in general, if you want to be a team that controls the tempo, the sort of caliber of the game, caliber, that's the wrong word, but if you want to be that kind of controlling type team, you have to be able to own the midfield. The All Whites are going to have a midfield moving forward, let alone guys like if Ryan Thomas is available or Sarpreet Singh and Matt Garvin and some of the more attacking options. But they're going to be able to have a midfield where this sort of CDM, this sort of box-to-box type roles are filled by Marko Stamenic and Joe Bell for at least the next 10 years. Like that's the core already of an extremely good team. I don't think we will ever had a midfield that compares to that. And we're still at the early stages of what they're capable of.
Yeah, so let's just enjoy it while we've got it. Let's enjoy the moment.
Absolutely, enjoy it.
We will see that combination in some upcoming All Whites fixtures, which will be fun to see. And then we'll worry about the next 10 years and see how that goes.
Well, it's just a point to say we don't have to worry about them imminently retiring or anything like that. Like that's down for the meantime. Sure. That is the permanent present that we can stick with.
The football Ferns, they've also got games this weekend. They are playing against Chile in Chile. They have the first game on Saturday. I believe they'll be broadcast somewhere. The second game will not be broadcast, so who knows how that game's going to play out. But I am curious, like, what are you preparing for with this football Ferns little series coming after the World Cup? Are there any new players coming into the squad? Any, stylistic, strategy, tactical things you're looking for? Obviously, big fans of the step over, big fans of the football Ferns razzle dazzle. So it would be nice to see a bit of funk in the football Ferns performances. India Paige Riley's selected. You often say Paige Satchel is one of the fastest football Ferns. She's in the squad. She should be getting a bit more game time after the World Cup, I believe. Millie Clegg's there as a bit of a dazzler as well. Claudia Bunge just scored a goal as a defender, nodding one home off a corner kick, I believe. So she's not part of the razzle dazzle crew, but she did score a goal.
Hitters are razzle dazzly as far as defenders are concerned,
And there's no shortage of typical Kiwi hitters in there. You got, Katie Bowen's going to nod one home. Hannah Wilkinson, centre forward, she's going to nod one home. I also especially We saw a bit of Anneli Longo in the World Cup, but as a Phoenix observer, I am curious how Anneli Longo goes and what she might offer the Phoenix moving forward, because she will be entering the Phoenix from international football. She had the World Cup, and I'm sure she's been training with the Phoenix, but now she's gone away with the football Ferns. So she goes back to the Phoenix with all this international momentum behind her. What are you looking for, mate?
There's a couple of things because it's not a tour where the results matter immensely, especially where the second one is that's not even televised. But why are you playing a behind closed door game? That doesn't make sense. If it's I don't know if that means it's going to count as a full international, or if it's just basically a training game. I don't know how that works. Because
Again, a
there've
bit
been
of
instances
mindfulness,
of
just
both for the
a bit of
fans.
mindfulness. You can't control that. You got to release that.
No, you can't. It was something that the Chilean association requested. Their team wanted that, and the football fans were just like, "Well, if you're going to let us play some games, then sweet as." So that's why that's happened. It's not a Ferns request or anything. They're just taking it as it comes. I think off the back of the World Cup, where everything had been focused on how do we get results in the World Cup. And these three fixtures that we're playing, how do we score goals? How do we not concede goals? How do we win games? How do we maybe draw games sometimes as well? And 2 out of 3 times that worked nicely. And they were very unlucky not to progress further, even with what they got. Like they were close in every other instance of the World Cup because it wasn't an expanded tournament in the past where 4 points in a decent and like an even goal difference would have put you through as one of the best third place qualifiers. But the expanded tournament means there's no more third place qualifiers, so that's how close they were. They're on the fringes, but they did get their first win. And because those games were quite specific to the task ahead of them, like it's how they've played against Norway, it's how they played against Switzerland in particular. Let's forget the Philippines, although they did dominate a lot of that game. Like they were super unlucky not to score on several occasions, including the one where they did score and then it got disallowed afterwards. Like that was a close game, and they did do some good progressive stuff, the likes of which we don't often see from the football Ferns. So there is something to be taken from that Philippines game too. But I'm curious what aspects of that tactical and sort of like that kind of game plan that they took into that tournament, what stuff from there is now going to just be what was specific to the World Cup and now we won't see again, and what is the kind of stuff that is like, no, this is just the identity of the team now. Like they've discovered some things. I like the formation is an obvious one, but it's also like how they use their midfielders, whether they want their fullbacks overlapping, like all these little tweaks within it. Do they pick the speed and skill out on the wings? Do they go with 2 strikers and just have more like sort of functional swinging and cross type wingers from deeper as they've done in the past? Like all these different things. That's curious to see. And then the other aspect is like a lot of that World Cup, like some of the best players for them were exactly what we haven't seen for the White Ferns, for example, for a while. They were different players stepping up into role players doing a job above what they were expected to do necessarily. Indy Riley is a good example of someone who outperformed her expectations going into the World Cup. I think Katie Bowen is a very experienced player and has been a first 11 player for quite a while, but playing as a centre back hasn't always been the case for her. So her doing that as a CB, probably their best player throughout the 3 games combined. If it wasn't her, it might have been Malia Steinmetz, who again is someone who really nailed on a position because of how well she did at the World Cup. And all 3 of those players that I just mentioned, as well as Claudia Bunge, as well as Paige Satchel is another one, they've all got moves to European clubs since the World Cup happened. A few others have signed on, like Anneli Longo going back to professional football to play for the Phoenix as an example. I think there's a couple other, like, Hannah Wilkinson's re-signed at Melbourne City. There's a few A-League ones like that. But in particular, the ones who have moved to Europe is sort of like, that's a more difficult thing to do. The Aussie League is a bit more comfortable to play, and it's a slightly lower standard, although not necessarily. It depends where you land, because I think the A-League would probably be not too dissimilar to where Paige Satchel is in the second tier of England. But Paige Satchel moving to England is a statement of intent as well. It's not just like the quality of the football she gets to play. It's also like saying, I'm serious about this football thing. I'm like taken my whole life over to the other side of the world to go fully committed at what I'm trying to do here. That is also something I think benefits a lot of players. It's just having that clarity of mindset and whatever. So there's a lot of that. Like there's a lot of things where it's the because I'm sure I used this phrase during the World Cup. Is like the World Cup isn't necessarily it's not the end of a cycle for them as it has been in the past at big tournaments where everything's led up to that and then they've had disappointing results and then or just if not disappointing then just like they weren't good enough so much so be it and then everything resets for the next World Cup cycle. This felt like it was the start of something, and so if it's the start of something, the momentum from that World Cup needs to follow on into these Chilean games. So that's what I'm most interested in seeing is how dominant the players who stepped up at the World Cup are against Chile in a friendly game. You know, it's a completely different context. They're away. They don't have the crowd. The second game isn't even a real game. But can those players still deliver the same kind of the same kind of performances and the same kind of leadership in their own way as well in this different context? Because if they can, that's a beautiful thing moving forward. Because that right there is that becomes the new version of the football Ferns.
What something that I was just pondering was this idea like the Warriors and like really captivating New Zealand. It's the same as what the football Ferns did. It's the same as the whole fandom around the World Cup, and I don't really see any difference. Like again, no, I can say all this stuff about rugby league and the standing of rugby league in New Zealand. None of that is different to what happened with football. So when you're thinking
Kiwis
about
love sport.
Yeah, when you're thinking about, like, I think what people in each of these sports like to do is celebrate it as a defining moment for the sport and the best ever, the greatest thing, all this stuff about the sport, when the reality, when you look at it from a broad perspective, it's not just the football Ferns, it was World Cup crowds throughout New Zealand and Australia were the biggest and best ever. Now we're looking at rugby league crowds and rugby league buzz, and people are saying, is this Warriors run bigger than their previous grand final runs? Well, when you view it all together, New Zealand just loves sports. We are the greatest sporting nation in the world, and it's just how I think it just reflects the changing nature of Kiwi sport fandom, where anyone, like you can just go to one friend, they play football. Everyone's got a friend who plays football, or you're listening to this, you are a football guy, your family's a football person. Football is one of the biggest sports in New Zealand. Rugby league is growing as one of those sports in New Zealand. And I think there is a common thread between the crowds you see at these events and following these teams, but also the foundation of support. Rugby league has really strong foundations in New Zealand. Football, as anyone knows listening to this segment of the podcast, they know the foundations of football in New Zealand as well. And I think there is a lot of crossover between those two waves to the point where you're like, well, this is just how New Zealand likes sport.
Yeah, well, I'd almost chuck the other sport we've talked about today. I'd almost say the same thing about cricket, which got a bit of a jump start because I think it's the 2015 Cricket World Cup was a bit more of a thing, but that was already established as more of like the summer sport, the national sport in summertime, rugby in the winter, cricket in the summer. So it didn't have so far to go, but definitely the White Ferns are getting more recognition and more visibility right now than they've ever had before, at a time when they maybe don't even deserve it as much as they certainly did in the past. Like, they've won a World Cup before. 20 years ago, they're the best team in the world. They didn't get this kind of recognition then that they're getting now.
But they think had a World Cup recently, and it wasn't.
They did have a World Cup recently. Unfortunately, they couldn't get crowds though, and also they sucked. So
yeah, well,
those two things combined didn't help.
That is how you get the crowds. New Zealand, the football Ferns defeated Norway in front of a monster crowd, setting up their next monster crowds. The Warriors are winning. The White Ferns didn't win. They didn't earn the fandom of the Kiwi sports public, regardless of how popular cricket is. Whereas the Black Caps in that 2015 World Cup, what did they do?
Yeah,
They won.
they did.
They created an environment, an atmosphere to bring in the fans, and that's a tangent we can stop now because we need to get into National League football. I've been thinking about the best way to kind of set this up for you, and we don't need. Well, it sounds like we do need the game by game breakdown and all the basic information because you're the only person providing that information. So you can do that in your written stuff. I think in the podcast, especially the Thursday podcast, setting up the weekend's fixtures, let's combine the men's and women's competitions. I don't want to ask you for like 5 key storylines, but that's kind of the angle I'm going for, where it's like, take all the football and hit me with some key storylines. Not a key storyline for every single game, but just 4 or 5, 3 to 5 key storylines across the wide range of National League games, men and women. Is there when I say key storyline, is there one storyline that stands above the rest as like, National League football this weekend is about X?
As a singular idea, probably not, because there's just that much going on in different.
Yeah, but is there a team? Like, what's the most important storyline?
Well, I am. You got me thinking. I might do a little bit like little game by game previews, like 1 or 2 sentence type stuff.
Let's work on it. Let's brainstorm.
I might do that on not here. I might do that on the.
Yeah, but let's work on it. Let's work through it.
Just throwing that out there, but
what pops in your head first?
I don't know where to start. I'm looking at the, what do you call it? The fixture list. We have 10 games. 4 on Saturday, 3 of them are women's games, and then 6 on Sunday, which is nice. Very much appreciate them spreading it out when they have just like 8 games on a Sunday. That makes it extremely hard to cover because everything's happening at once. The standout fixtures on the women's side, I do think that Ellerslie versus Wellington Phoenix game is going to be pretty handy because neither of those teams have played National League at this level before. Ellerslie are a bit of an unknown team outside of Brittany Cunningham-Lee, who scores heaps of goals for them and played in the under-17s when they got the bronze medal at the World Cup a few years back. And the Wellington Phoenix, obviously, like that's the dawn of a new era for Wellington Phoenix. It's the women's team, the women's reserves team. They're under-20s having their first ever National League game. A few of them, it won't be the first ever National League game for a lot of the players specifically, because a few of those players have played for like Central or Capital in the past. So there is some experience there. I do like the look of a Waterside Karori versus Wellington United derby as well, because that was the game that decided the Women's Central League. Karori were leading, the Wharfies, apparently they call themselves, the Wharfies. They were leading the table going into the last round of the season, but only by like 1 point or something against Wellington United. So Wellington United needed to win that game. Karori needed to win or draw. It was a draw. Waterside Karori win the league. Both of them make National League. They are working in conjunction with Capital Football, though. So, which is a weird thing because they now are styled as CF Waterside Karori and CF Wellington United as in Capital Football. So I don't know what that means. I don't know if that's just a matter of Capital Football are helping them with the logistics, or if it means that they get to sign players from other teams for the National League, because that would be quite interesting to see which Petone players end up where. That's a good one.
What are the like key things in those games? Because you've mentioned, you're rolling through the games. I'm trying to like boil down to like what's just an element in that game to throw up. Is there like a young phenom, Wellington Phoenix having teams in National League? More of that stuff and less of the miscellaneous train spotter, Capital Football logistics.
Well, that's not train spotter stuff because that tells you whether they will have those players. Like it says, will they be able to sign players beyond their squad? which would strengthen them. And you might, obviously the ones you're targeting are going to be the best ones from around from teams who didn't make it. I don't know what that looks like because information is so scarce, which is limiting my ability to fulfill your question here because I don't even know what some of these squads are going to
Well,
look
so
like.
who was the player you mentioned, the goal scorer for the one player you mentioned in that first bit? Everington.
Oh, Brittany Cunningham-Lee from Ellerslie.
Who's she?
She's a goal scorer. She played at the under-17 World Cup. I said that, but I don't really have that much else. Oh, she did get the Golden Boot in
There
the
we go.
Northern League, so there's that. There's something for you. I already said the under-17 World Cup bit though. That's the big buzz. She's played some National League before for Auckland back when they used to have a Fed team, but because she plays for Ellerslie, they didn't qualify last year.
Is
That's how that
she
goes.
is she like a certified National League trooper, or is she a young player on the rise?
Under 17s in 2018. So whatever that math adds up to, she's the same age as Kelly Brown, Grace Wisniewski, those types who are also in Gabby Rennie, who are also in that same team. So
But she's been around for a while, but she does have like goal scoring dominance at the like she is riding a bit of a goal scoring dominant wave at the moment, which could flow into National League, thus propelling her to big Donny goal scorer status in domestic football.
yeah, that seems a fair thing to say, particularly in light of, there is talk about a future Auckland A League team, which I would imagine would mean an A League team that has a men's and a women's team, same as the Wellington Phoenix do. In which case, the best players in Auckland are suddenly potentially auditioning, get themselves in that kind of mix for pro deals. That's not out of the question within the next couple of years. So someone in her age range, for example, certainly something to look at. The fixture that stands out for me on the men's side this week is probably Manurewa versus Wellington Olympic. I like the idea of a South Auckland team returning to the National League. Like the idea of there being National League played at a ground where I've played football before, like including as a kid, where I played a lot, mostly only as a kid. But at Memorial Park there in Rewa. Also like the idea of their National League sort of bow their return to the stage because they were quite a big club in like the 80s back in the day, but in different many National League formats ago. I like the idea of the return being against Wellington Olympic as well, who are potentially the best team from outside of the Northern League, so the toughest unknown they could be facing. First up, like Jack Henry Sinclair and Joel Stevens and Hamish Watson and Gianni Bazookas and these guys just like trying to score as many goals as they scored all of last year as well, like just carrying on what they do. That is a baptism of fire for Rewa, but I kind of think they'll enjoy that. I kind of think they're the type of team that would like a little bit of a chip on the shoulder, give us that baptism of fire. They got a few South Americans and a lot of Fijians in that Rewa team, so there'll be some fiery stuff going on. I love it.
Is Hamish Watson playing?
Hopefully, like I say, he was playing for Olympic throughout the winter season, so hopefully he'll still be there National League. Yeah, I can't say for certain because often players just don't. Like sometimes players are like, "Nah, I'm going on holiday to Rarotonga this week or something. I can't play for the next month." Sometimes guys just don't commit to the thing. Watto's been back and forth between New Zealand and Australia, but the fact he spent the winter season here this year is probably a good sign that he'll continue on for Wellington Olympic. And I expect he will, because Wellington Olympic, that is a strong team with National League credentials. Like they're the team that have been pushing Auckland City in the last year or two. Like since the club-based format, they're the only ones that have really challenged. Maybe Eastern Suburbs gave them a challenge in the winter stuff this year. Christchurch United will back themselves to give them a nudge in this National League. But Wellington Olympic are the only team that's been there, done that, like proven that they can push City, even though they still lost to them in the grand final last year. That's their context. Is they're established as the best of the rest, and there are other contenders for best of the rest status this year, but Olympic are the ones with runs on the board.
Is Ben Mata in that mix as well?
He certainly is. Goal scoring centre back, penalty specialist.
So you mentioned like every player except the two most interesting Wellington lads, Ben Matu and Hamish
I
Watson. That's all
think
I care about.
all whites cap Joel Stevens is pretty interesting. Jack Emery Sinclair, the one of the, like, I think he's. I can't remember if he's won MVP or not, but if he hasn't, he should have. The problem is they always give the MVP to the wrong players in this league. But he's been established as one of the best domestic players for a long time. Has tried with the Phoenix, hasn't gotten a pro gig yet, but he's certainly someone worthy of one.
They don't
Like I
do
said,
what
that's a stacked team. That's a
they
good
don't
team.
do what
But
Hamish
limited
Watson
team.
does though. Like Hamish Watson always dishes up some sort of quirky domestic National League football thing
For
every
sure.
season. And Ben Mutt is basically the Stephen Adams of the National League. So are there any other interesting men's I went with storylines. You seem to be going for just the most interesting games. We'll collaborate on that, and I'll ask you for the another interesting men's game.
Well, let me throw this one at you then. I do like Eastern Suburbs Christchurch United though, because that's a rematch of the Chatham Cup semi-final where Suburbs went to Christchurch and lost, and it's the only game they've lost this year. So that's going to be a great rematch. But I do, the thing about it, like the first round of National League is just like absorb the information. That's why it's hard to preview, because I don't know what these teams are going to look like. I haven't seen them enough. I don't necessarily know who's going to be in the teams necessarily, or if they do, I'm not familiar with them. In that case, Napier City Rovers versus Petone is a very good one, because I'm not on that central football like vicinity where I can go watch those games. It's a little further away. I know Napier City Rovers have a couple of very good imports who've been scoring a lot of goals for them lately. They always seem to find good imports in Napier. That's something they're good at, but they're always different every year. So you gotta come to you gotta grow accustomed to them. I'm curious to see how they look, but also Petone, who haven't been at this stage before, and just seems like a fun club with a lot of good people doing the right stuff. And there's
Well,
there's a few players in there that I do recognize. There's a lot I don't recognize, but one guy I'm really excited to see for Petone is their top scorer, Matt Brazier, who is a futsal international for New Zealand, but he's like 25 or 26, hasn't really played at this level before. I know he's spent a lot of time in Australia, so I think maybe a lot of his football's been played there as well. But he was the Golden Boot in the Central League for the team that finished fourth. That seems like a pretty good shout. Like normally it's just the runaway champs will have the Golden Boot. This is the dude who's been scoring heaps of goals at a level comparable and better than in some cases. A lot of these great strikers I've already mentioned from Wellington Olympic and other top clubs around the country, who just doesn't have the known. He might have the pedigree, but he doesn't have the known pedigree in the New Zealand sort of scene yet. And when you get that sort of bolt from the blue, that's kind of unknown factor, that's crazy, because you don't get a lot of that. Mostly the guys who do that are guys who were playing age grade football and stuff like that for New Zealand. Like, here's a guy who doesn't necessarily have that. Let's see what he can do. Matt Brazier for Petone.